Get the recording set up and going. Today, we have our special educational headliner, Lance Miller. He's an award-winning speaker and trainer. He's Toastmasters 2005 world champion of public speaking and has delivered over 5,000 speeches in over 80 countries on public speaking, leadership, and overcoming failure and adversity. Over the last 20 years, he has coached over 600 speakers, including coaching 15 people to the finals of the Toastmasters International Speech Contest and 2 world champions. Today, he will be sharing with us tips on how to create and inject humor into our presentations. Please join me in welcoming Lance Miller.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. And thanks for inviting me here today. And just, Tom, you're the man in the hat. You got a plethora of hats behind you there. So I don't know, maybe you need to be the man in the hats. I'm not sure how that works, but I want to get the word of the day in early so I don't forget it. But humor is something that I think everybody, I know I certainly struggled with putting humor in my speech, and I had a lot of humor in speeches, and I didn't know why. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was able to figure out how to put humor in the speech. And a lot of the speeches I coach, I see great opportunities for humor that they're missing where they are. But one of the reasons I think humor is very important is that when we're speaking with an audience, it should not be a monologue. It shouldn't just be one way. We're just talking to the audience. And we need to create a dialogue with the audience. And okay, I just disappeared off the screen. What happened here? Was that you guys or was that me? Okay, there, I'm back. I have no idea what happened there.
You were out of the world. You were a plethora.
So, okay, is this part of the whole routine here? You invite a speaker and then you start shutting his video off and then putting other things in and find you're funny as I'm the butt of all the jokes here. No, that you want to create a dialogue with the audience. And the dialogue, I would say laughter is the audience talking back to you. And so you create an exchange and you can actually can get that energy going. And when you're getting good laughter with an audience as a speaker, you're connecting with them and you feel great on stage because you're getting some good laughs. They're enjoying it. And if you're standing on stage and you're not getting any response, I know we're sitting there going, what am I doing up here? Do they hate me? What's going on? So humor's a very important element, I think, in speaking in general. And I've had a lot of people contact me over the years, wanting a formula to put humor in. And I have some mechanisms. I have 10 mechanisms I want to work with you. I'm going to try to get through today in the amount of time we have. But it's hard to put a formula on humor because probably one of the main components of humor is it is a surprise. And it's hard to put a formula for a surprise because it has to be something outside of a formula. So if we have a speaking box we're speaking in, the humor is going to be something that's not in the box. It's something that we're relating outside the box in some capacity. So the first component I want to tell you is just we say something the audience did not expect. That's the main thing that I would share. And I have, just so you know, I have a YouTube channel and I also have I think it's 110 speaking tips that I send one out a week. I have a whole section on humor. So I'm going to try to access some of those through sharing my screen here. And let's see if we can pull up some surprises. And if we can't, we'll just roll with it. Let's see. What do you guys see? Are you seeing any? There we go. I got that. Okay, this is just some surprise comments I had. So here, you're going to hear me talking. I think you're going to hear me talking. Use here is. Can you hear that? You heard it?
No audio right now.
Okay. Please, I just realized I forgot to click sound when I did that.
Thought I heard something.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm gonna know. That's fine. Let's try it again. Let's see what we got. It's down here. This is David Brooks. David Brooks is the 1990
Success.
world champion. So let's watch what David does here.
No, this was the era of Superman, Sky King, and Roy Rogers. My brothers and I would watch their shows, and when they were over, we would go outside and reenact them. My older brother, of course, he'd get to be Roy Rogers. So naturally, I got to be Dale Evans.
Now, I'm sorry that was chopped up. So what happened with David there? Let me pop out here. I've got several examples in that clip, but what happened was he's talking about Sky King, Superman, Sky King, and whoever the other one was, Batman or whatever it was. So you're thinking when someone's going to be Roy Rogers, that someone else is going to be Batman or Superman. That's who you're expecting. And he says, I get to be Dale Evans. And of course, it's a doubly unexpected because he's a guy and Dale Evans is Roy Rogers' wife. Those of you that know who Dale Evans is. So that was just an example of a surprise that came out. So that's where we go. Now, the next thing I'm talking about after we put a surprise in, a lot of things are funny simply because of the timing and inflection we put on them. And our delivery has so much to do with making things funny. And an example of that was, I was at a sales seminar, and quite honestly, this was like 28 years ago, and I still remember this. And the gentleman delivering it was from Scotland, and he'd moved to the United States, and he got a job selling books. And they said, go out on the street and you sell these books. And so it was in Florida, and it was in summer, and it was like 95 degrees. It was like 90% humidity, and he's standing on the street corner with this table of books, sweating like crazy. And he goes, I'm not selling anything. And he says, I look across the street and there's a mall. And I said, well, I'll go over in the mall and sell the books. At least I'll be in the air conditioning. So he sets up his table in the mall, and he's trying to sell books. And the security comes over because, as you know, you're not allowed to go into a mall and set up a retail book stand. Everybody in the mall is paying to be there, right? Because security comes over and they go, are you selling books? And in this Scottish accent, he goes, no, I haven't sold anything all day. And the whole emphasis was security's asking him if he's here selling books, you know, because he's not supposed to be in the mall selling anything. And he's going, no, I'm not selling anything because I'm such a bad salesman. And it got a huge roar in the audience when he said that, but it was just an example. He could have answered that. The security came over and asked me if I'm selling books. And I said, no, I haven't sold anything today or something. And he could have said it without the emphasis on it, would have been not have been nearly as funny. So there's a lot of ways you can put humor in your speech just with the pause and putting emphasis on something. And that creates a surprise response to the audience. Now, the next device I use is an analogy. And of course, analogy is saying something is like something else. And what you want to do is find something that nobody's expecting something to be like. And analogies are used all the time in humor. And I've got, actually, I had a list from an English class of bad analogies one point, in high school English class of bad analogies. And they were hysterical. They were so bad, but it was like he hit the ground like a garbage bag and sounded like a garbage bag full of vegetable soup. And on it, but I'm going to pull up another video here with just a couple examples of analogies. It's analogies are 33. There we go. Okay, welcome back to another speaking tip this week. I'm continuing my tips on humor and different mechanisms and ways to put humor. Video started. Speeches. And today's tip is on using an analogy. Okay, so let's take this up where we got. Seinfeld is the one that Seinfeld had a really funny analogy on this. So let's see if I can get Jerry to expand here. Are you seeing this?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Jerry's doing a theme on cookies. He's talking about how evil cookies are, and that in the evening they have these really nice names on them, but then in the evening they attack you. So listen to the analogy that he does here.
I have no chance.
Oh, that come too.
It's a war. It's a war between us and the cookies. Look at that box. It's like a.
Yeah, we're not getting the audio with the video this time.
Okay. So what in this one, just so that we stay on time on it, he's talking about the cookies. It's like a war with the cookies. He said they're in this carton. It's like a troop carrier, and they're all in their little plastic cutout. And he does this whole analogy between cookies being soldiers, and they're there to attack. And the audience is just laughing, through the whole thing. And it's, it's again just a great comparing something you would not typically compare anything to is a great mechanism. The next mechanism is something just called a triad. A triad is a very easy way to put humor into your speeches. And a lot of times when I'm evaluating speeches, someone will give 2 examples. Now, triads, 3 examples. Triads are very powerful in speaking, period. They're great ways to get your point across. They set a pattern. They set up 3 components of a personality or a location that people really understand what's going on. What you do to put humor with the triad, the first 2 make sense, and the third one is unexpected. And there's a number of ways to do that. In my openings, my world champion speech, I had an opening triad. I said I was saying I was 26 years old. I lived in a small town in Indiana, but my triad was I had a job I didn't like. I hadn't had a date in 3 years, and I had a couple of roommates named Mom and Dad. Okay, so now that's a little bit of a surprise, but the third one was the laughter. I use another one in my speaking where I talk about my first job as a kid. We raised horses. I was shoveling manure. But I said I learned 3 valuable lessons in life shoveling manure. The first one is the only way the job gets done is 1 scoop at a time. I used to wish that manure into the manure spreader. The second one was it's better to handle it on a daily basis and allow it to accumulate. And then I go in on how my life was changed because of that. And I said the third lesson I learned was any job I had after that was a promotion. Okay, so it always gets a good laugh. And if you notice, I paused. Any job I had after that, pause, because that gives the audience a time for them to like sort of dub in what's he going to say. And then you go, was a promotion, meaning there's no worse job than I had. There were only worse types of manure. Anyway, great example of a triad. And just because I'm having a little bit of difficulty with getting the videos to click here and the time, we'll walk through that. But I do want to let you know, you can each one of these points I'm making, I have a 5 to 10 minute video you can go watch and have real examples on it. Now, there's also something I call the declining triad. And I've seen this used a number of times. We had one gentleman in my club that used it repeatedly, always got great laughs. But it's where you start off with something that's really big, and then you go, well, it really wasn't that quite big. Well, actually, it's pretty small. As an example, you could say, man, when I was in high school, I got a date with the most beautiful girl in school. Well, I mean, she was probably one of the prettiest girls in my class, I mean, when you get down to it, she was pretty homely, and you just go down the line, or, I won so much money, or, I won so much money, I wasn't going to have to work for the rest of my life. Or let's just, I wasn't going to have to work probably for 20. Now, you know what? I don't know that I even get it through I wouldn't even get through the year with it. So you go down and they set the scene, and then you take it into this really small thing where it was. So it's a very effective way to sort of play with the mind of the audience. The next one is what I call stating the obvious. Now, there's comedians that are just phenomenal at stating the obvious. One of the people that I love was George Carlin, and most people on this call are old enough to know George Carlin. But I remember one time he had this whole routine on religion, and he said, here's God. He's all knowing. He's everywhere. He can heal heal the blind and make the lame walk, and he knows everything about you, and he can give you eternal life. But he seems to have a problem with money. You need to give him money. He hasn't figured out how to get money. And it was like, okay, all the churches are there, and everybody's wanting people to donate to the churches and give them money and stuff. And anyway, it was just an obvious observation. In my world champion speech, I make this statement, and I never was really expecting to get a laugh at it, but it was so obvious when I said it, especially in the finals, I got a great laugh on it. And I was talking about how people think they're smart if they can, as you know, my speech was about validating what's right in people, finding what's good in people. And a lot of people are always trying to point out what's negative. And I said, it takes no special skill or talent to find an imperfection in another person. And all of a sudden I get this roar going across the whole room because I just stated the obvious. There's so many people that think they're so smart that I know what's wrong with you. You know what your problem is? That doesn't take any special skill or talent. Can you find what's right? Now that takes skill. Okay, I got a great laugh on that one. Another stating the obvious was Mark Brown's speech. And he was talking about the senior character of Beauty and the Beast. I can't remember his name, but he was the Beast. And he goes, you know, he was tall, he was dark, he was handsome. And he goes, I can relate to that because Mark Brown is tall, dark, and handsome. Okay. And so it was the obvious. He's standing there and he just says, it was a surprise statement. I can relate to that. So state the obvious. Now here's the other one. Like I inverted a triad. You can invert the obvious. And I use one in most of my keynotes that I do. And I'll talk about, I said, I came from a big family. There were 6 kids in the family. They were all boys, except 5 of them. Okay. So what you do, you set the scene, they're all boys, and you say, except 5 of them. So they have to do the math and they realize, oh, there was 1. You're the only boy. Okay. It would have, I could have said, I grew up in a large family. I was the only boy. There were 5, I had 5 sisters. I don't get any laughs. I don't get any disruption of thought with the audience. There's nothing surprising about that whatsoever. You can invert the obvious in a number of different ways. There's a speaker I know named Charlie Plum, and Charlie was a POW in Vietnam. And I had an uncle who was a 13th POW, so I should have some connection on that. And Charlie spoke at my Rotary Club. And he talked about, he goes, I graduated from the Naval Academy. I will let you know, I wasn't the top of the class at the Naval Academy. As a matter of fact, I was in the part of the class that made the upper half of the class possible. Okay. Instead of saying, I graduated in the bottom half of my class, he said, I was in the part of the class that made the upper half possible. It's a way to invert it, and you get a laugh from that standpoint. And an example I was going to show you was Darren LaCroix in his speech was talking about, he set out for the American dream and he bought a Subway sandwich shop. He goes, folks, I want to let you know, in 1 year, I took an $80,000 debt and I doubled that debt. And he got a good laugh on that. And then he goes, that's right. I turned Subway sandwich shops into a nonprofit organization. Okay. Now, instead of saying I failed miserably with my Subway sandwich shop, he inverts it and gets huge laughs from the standpoint. So there's all different ways when you're putting your speeches together. You look, how can I flip that around some way and say it backwards? There's another thing I call just what I call a dramatic shift. Okay. And the examples I had in the video was Mark Brown in his speech was talking about how all the village people, and he's singing the song from Beauty and the Beast, but how the village people they're picking up their forks and their torches, and they're going to charge forward and they're going to kill the beast. And he's getting really loud and he goes, why? So he had this big thing, we will kill the beast. And he stops and goes, why? And everybody laughs because it was just this dramatic shift from where he was to where, bringing a different viewpoint to the scene he just created. LaShonda Rundles also had one where she talked about her mother would put her in situations that she couldn't handle, and she would be overwhelmed, and her mother would come in and rescue her, and then their mother would tell her that she rescued you. And she said, I got a question for you. If you push someone who doesn't know how to swim into the deep end of the swimming pool, and then jump in and rescue them. Is that a rescue? And that pause just made this dramatic shift over to shifting on that viewpoint. Is that really a rescue? Okay. The ninth one I want to go through with you is what I call the double meaning. And you can use a word or something in it, and then you can invert the meaning. And I did that a little bit with my parking and my parking validation in my speech. Because in my speech, I go one day after a business meeting, all I wanted to do is get my parking validated. So I walked over to the receptionist and I said, "Excuse me, do you validate?" She goes, "Yes, I do. You have a lovely smile." She validates me instead of validating the ticket for my parking. Get a huge laugh, and then the whole speech is about how I validate other people based on the receptionist's example. But I had a double meaning for the word validation that I was using, and I flipped that meaning. Morgan MacArthur, who's another one of the world champions, was talking about, I would do it, but I can't, but I don't have enough time, but I don't have enough money. He goes, if we don't get off these butts, we're never going to get anything done. And he flipped the word but from being an excuse to actually being a posterior to our body. And it got a good laugh. We don't get off these butts. Worked really well. And then Willie Jones had a great one. I think Willie Jones is 93 or 94. He talked about the Monsignor was, or a new priest was giving a sermon, and in front of the congregation, the Monsignor came out and said that was a horrible sermon and really berated him in front of the congregation. And he said, I'll do better next week. So the next week he gets up and he stands up and he says, I want to let you know that, he goes, I can sin. He says, you can sin. The Monsignor can sin. And he's going through some stuff and he goes, I want to let you know that I can go to hell. You can go to hell. And points at it, meaning the Monsignor can go to hell, but he's flipping the meaning of telling the Monsignor to go to hell from the standpoint of that. Got a huge laugh. Didn't even have to finish the sentence. Got a huge laugh on it. And the last thing I want to go over before we open it up to some Q&A, callbacks. Callbacks are great little things to slip into your speech. I have a callback I put into most of my speeches where I talk pretty early on in the speech. I'll say, my grandmother, used to say you could say anything about anybody as long as you end with God bless him. I say, that's the ugliest man I've ever seen in my life. God bless him. It just makes everything okay. Excuse me. So during the speech, there's different things that'll come up. And I'll say, I had this person in my Toastmasters club. They were causing all this problem. They finally left. And I go, God bless him. Always gets a good laugh. The other thing is, that's a really good card to have in your hand. If you make a mistake or you got a problem in your PowerPoint or something like that, and somebody says, you misspelled a word in your PowerPoint, I can go, oh, God bless you. And it just sort of keeps the person in the audience instead of like you pointing out my flaws to me. So those are 10 mechanisms that you can use to put humor in your speech. As I said, I have a 5 to 10 minute video on my YouTube channel on each one. You can get into it more for this club to figure out how to do that. But let's open it up to some Q&A at this point. That'd be great.
We're watching around the room. Raise your hand physically or shout out. Go right ahead.
Wow, I did such a good job. They're just
Yeah. Well, I love that little bit about triad diminishing, going down. That's a great way to deflate. It works great on politicians, in my opinion. I'm a country boy. Looking around the room, shout out again. Now, here's an example. See how this could be done. Koki used this as his icebreaker speech, and he alluded to it. He started off saying, I speak 3 languages: Japanese, Google Translate, and Accrual Accounting. And he's been my dear friend ever since. So that's your triad, but with a lot of other elements there, right?
Yeah. So Sherry's got a question there. Go ahead.
All right, Sherry Rafferty.
Raftery. Thank you very much, Lance. Always good to hear from you. I have a plethora of questions, of course, but it would be kind of fun if we heard some folks perhaps say a sentence or two or had a little dialogue, and then we could jump in and sort of add those the threes, the triads in there as live examples on how to really actually do that.
Quite honestly, I was really hoping the video component was going to work because you got to see speakers in action with it.
Yes.
To Tom's point, I'll say people go, do you speak any other language? I said, no, I speak 2 languages. I speak English and English as a second language. Okay. And so on it, and it's, you always get a chuckle because it's not expected, but from that standpoint. But yeah, we can play with whatever anybody has here. I had my Toastmasters meeting today, and we had a very funny. I was good. I was getting ready for this. I'm not going to tell it, but it was a very funny joke. It was just completely unexpected punchline, just nothing you would ever predict in it, and that's what typically makes. I said that surprise component in the humor is what makes it work. So,
when you respond, go ahead.
I just wondered, there's so many different techniques. How do you know which is the right one to use when, or do you just test them out and see what works?
Yeah, this is more an art form than a science. That's what I'm saying. It's, it's like, how does an artist know what color to do? I don't know how they know what color to put on there, but it's an art form. And I'm always just trying to think, you have to be, instead of thinking in your speech, like, oh, this is my speech, you need to think outside that point. Here's my speech. What other things could I do in here that could add components into it? And I said, a lot of times I get speeches that come in and I'm going through it. I'm going through the speech the person sent to me to coach them on, and I'm seeing opportunities for humor in there. But the other thing is you got to set the story up so the story's working. And I see, here's another major point I want to make. Humor put in a speech for humor's sake doesn't work. The humor should always forward the message or help make the point of the speech. That I've seen people just put a joke. I've seen like at Chamber of Commerce luncheons where we're bringing in a major businessman, he's telling a story, then all of a sudden he stops in the middle and tells a joke that has nothing to do with anything he's talking about. It's just a joke that he heard. And that doesn't do anything because we're taking the audience on a journey with our speech, and we want to make sure that the humor fits into the story and fits into the message. Tyree,
Hey, Lance, thanks for sharing your plethora of experiences in humor and speaking. And I was just wondering, is using callbacks an effective way of integrating humor along with staying on message?
Yeah, and that was my last point, was using callbacks that you do. But what I have found most effective is if you are able to slip a callback, you're able to put the point that's going to be the callback into the speech, but people don't understand it's a callback yet. But they listen to your speech. Like I said, I'll talk about something and in my speeches, and one of the things I typically slip in there, because I never know when I'm going to use it, but I'll use it throughout the speech, is this whole, God bless you component. And I say, my grandmother, I said, you can say anything about anybody as long as you know God bless them. Now I've set that up. Nobody knows I'm going to use it. And then through the speech, I'll use that 5 or 6 times. And sometimes I said, like, I really screwed up. And I'm looking at the audience saying, God bless me. And I get a good laugh just throwing that out as I come through. Yeah, callbacks are a very effective way to use it. But like anything, you have to use the callback correctly. You have to have it in the right context in your speech as you're going through it.
Yes, marvelous. Callbacks are very effective. I totally agree. Unfortunately, in the International Speech Contest, we're not allowed to do that. But in the real world of speaking, callbacks at an event makes you engaging. So we really appreciate that. That's a good point.
Wait, what do you mean you can't do that in the International Speech Competition?
As far as calling out for other speakers. So I should.
No,
Yeah.
Other speakers.
Right. Callbacks for your own event. Yeah.
No, from your own speech. You put them in your own
Yes.
speech. Yeah. And so I actually just, on my regional speech, there was a guy that told a story about his Uncle Ernie. And when I came out, this is 20 years before that rule came down. I came out and I said, I did my opening. I said, fellow Toastmasters friends and Uncle Ernie, and got a huge laugh, from the audience, because he'd set up his Uncle Ernie, who was sitting right in the front row. So
yeah.
I'd be
At a non-Toastmasters event and conferences, yes, that's awesome. We do that all the time. I'm a big believer of doing that as well. How about one more before we get to your final thoughts? Mark Jane's got her hand up.
Oh, and I see Melanie does too. So I'll make mine quick. Is there any type of a speech or any occasion where you feel it's just not appropriate to add some humor?
No, I mean, I've done eulogies, and eulogies are some of the most difficult speeches I've ever done, because you really have to bring somebody's life together, but getting the audience to laugh, because one of the other things I try to do in eulogies, nobody lives a perfect life. Everybody ruffles people's feathers in the process of it. And I need to indicate some of the points. And I did my mother-in-law, and my mother-in-law she was a very difficult, she moved in, with this long story. But I said, you know, I said, Barbara was a little bit like the salsa, or excuse me, the cilantro and the salsa of life. You know, I said a whole mouthful of the cilantro by itself was very unpalatable, but when you mix it in with everything else, she brought a lot of spice and a lot of interest to the mixture. And everybody was cracking up when I said she was like the cilantro and the salsa of life, because she would come in and find the outpoints in the drapes and say, oh, that's ridiculous. They shouldn't have put those drapes up there. Nobody else cares about the drapes, but she would find a problem with them, you know? So we have another question.
That wraps it up. Lance, what's your final thoughts for us going forward?
Just, you know, I said this is more an art form than it is a science. So just play with it and try to come up with crazy ideas. Take a statement and go, how many, let me see if I can say that 5 or 6 different ways. And if you go on my YouTube channel or subscribe to my speaking tips, and I'll send them out to you once a week, and you know, you'll see these mechanisms with actual examples in video form of people using them. And it's really a lot of fun when you look at a speech and see, oh, there's 3 spaces in here. There's a great opportunity for humor right there. Let me figure out how to make that work, because I have some tools to make it work with. So it's a developed skill, just like speaking is. So you've developed your speaking skill, now develop your humor skill.
Exactly. And that's why this club was launched, was so we could help improve that and help people who, well, didn't think they could find humor, and yet great examples of what we're learning and watching. Give Lance a hand. Thank you ever so much.